This is our third webinar in the series from the Horticulture Next Generation program. My name's Russell Cummings and I'm the project leader. We've just, for a bit of an update in the project, we've just finished another sort of 2 days of workshops for the 50 workshop attendees in Melbourne. Went really well, covered a whole heap of business leadership topics, and today we have a little bit of a field trip and travel around and saw some of the great businesses in Melbourne, Melbourne area. So a good couple of days. But today we're here to run a webinar. Our webinar is with Dr. Darryl Cross. Just allow me, I'll let Darryl talk a little about himself, but allow me to introduce him. Very privileged to have Darryl join us tonight, and thanks very much, Darryl. Darryl started his career as a telegram delivery boy. I think that makes you at the forefront of email, Darryl, I'm not quite sure. Probably email 1.0. Darryl's now an accredited leadership and careers coach. He's also quite unique in that he's a clinical and organisational psychologist. Runs his own consulting business, which is called Crossways Consulting in Adelaide. He's a brilliant consultant, author, international speaker, and a university lecturer. And he has a range of videos. There's a whole heap of information that you can get through the Horticulture Next Generation website. We've got links to Darryl's video channel there, and he covers a whole range of topics. So great to have him along here tonight. And I guess I'll hand over to Darryl. He's going to talk to us now about positive psychology and leadership, and what can we learn from that. So Darryl, all over to you. Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Russell, and welcome to everyone on board tonight for the webinar. I see a few questions regarding various issues with voice feedback, etc. Look, Emily in the Melbourne office will be attending to those issues for you. So if you do have issues hearing in any way, then post your question, and Emily will be onto that in terms of the technological side. But let me just continue to say welcome again. And let me ask you a key question here. Where were you in 1998? What were you doing in that year? What was happening for you? Can you remember what you were doing? Because it was actually a very significant time for psychology and the profession of psychology, because it was that time that Professor Martin Seligman actually took over the presidency of the American Psychological Association, to which you would probably say, so what? Well, the so what was that shortly after that, he started to look at the upside of psychology. Most of Seligman's life and most of psychology as a profession looks at the downside of life, whether you like to call it depression, whether you like to call it anxiety, or any other number of clinical issues, but it hasn't done much to look at the upside until Seligman and some of his cohorts came along. And he published a couple of texts, one in 2002 and the most recent one last year called Flourish. And this is really all about the upside of psychology. In other words, what do we do to make life normal? How can we make it more fulfilling and not just focus in on the mental illness alone? How can we assist those who are relatively functioning well, who are in the so-called average range, rather than just devoting all of our resources to those who are struggling to get up to base grade? So positive psychology, it's been a major movement. It really took off. It was certainly around the place before the late 1990s, but it took off significantly with Professor Martin Seligman, and it's really based on a lot of scientific evidence, some really good hard data. It uses tried and true methods of measurement. It has undertaken numerous experiments of both longitudinal research and what we call random assignment. These are all jargon terms to say, look, the research is thorough, the research is reliable, the research is valid, and it really has worked out very clearly what works and what doesn't. And what I thought it was important to do is to have a look at this whole area and see what it might say to us in terms of leadership, because I think leaders need all the help they can get in lots of areas. And you know as well as I do that in many, many instances, people just believe that because you've got the title of leader or you've got the position that somehow or other you can magically lead. And as I was speaking to a law partner I was coaching here in my office in Adelaide last week, he said, you know, I've put in 15 odd years and I'm a partner in this firm, but he said no one has ever trained me in leadership, and yet I'm a partner in the firm. And I think that's typical of many of us in the professions, that we get good technical training, but we don't get many hints on how to lead. Each of the 5 elements of well-being, which is this whole area of positive psychology, has to have 3 properties to count as an element. So there are basically 5 elements I'm going to go through with you now and explain to you. These are the 5 elements that make up this movement, I guess, of positive psychology, but they do relate very keenly to leadership. And each of the 5 elements, number 1, need to contribute to well-being. I guess that goes without saying. 2, many people pursue each of these elements for their own sake and not merely to just get any of the other elements. And 3, it's defined and measured independently of the other elements. In other words, it is an exclusive area. So the 5 elements of well-being that relate to leadership, what on earth are we talking about here? Well, in a nutshell, it's these: positive emotion, E for engagement, R for relationships, M for meaning, and A for accomplishment. So if you remember PERMA for the letters for each of those 5 areas, then in a sense you've got the essence of what an accomplished, positive, meaningful life might look like. So let's drill down on each of these areas and see what they might have to say to us. What are some of the things that have been scientifically validated that help us lead a really positive life? Well, in the first instance, we have something called P for positive emotion. It's the pleasant life, it's life satisfaction. So what is it that makes us happier? I mean, that's a key question for all of us on the planet, and we're constantly asking, how do we be happy? What makes us happy? Well, number 1, the research shows that gratitude can make your life happier and more satisfying. And what is interesting about that is that I often ask some of the people that I coach, because I know there's a guy in Melbourne I coach who's a GM who finds it difficult to get his head around the day and the crises, and I say to him, I want you to make a gratitude list of all the things you're grateful for. The fact you can wake up in a warm bed, the fact that you open your eyes and you've got a roof over your head, the fact you're happily married, the fact you've got 2 wonderful kids, and on it goes. Things that ordinarily in life we might take for granted, I'm telling this particular individual to list them down. Have a list of 10, and it's a gratitude list. But I've noted there under number 1, the gratitude visit. That's a really interesting exercise which is guaranteed to promote well-being for a minimum of 3 months. What is it exactly? It's basically that you write a gratitude letter or a letter of thanks to somebody in your life who's had a profound and significant effect on your life. It might be a past teacher. It might be a parent. It might be a grandparent. It might be a previous boss. It might be an uncle. It might have been a sports coach. It could have been your music teacher. But you write the letter thanking them for the impact that they have had on your life and what it has meant to you. Now, not many of us take time to do that, of course, but the evidence is that if we do take time to do that, and then we visit that person, make a time to see them. I mean, if they're overseas, that might be a bit difficult, but if they're close at hand, it's certainly a lot easier, where you sit down with them and you read the letter to them and then you hand the letter over. Of course, that'll make a significant impact on their life, but it's guaranteed to have a significant impact on your life too. Number 2, what went well? I've said we spend too much time thinking about what went wrong and not enough time thinking about what went right in our lives. So one of the exercises I set for many of the people that I coach is at the end of the day, rather than going home and perhaps speaking to your partner or spouse, or even if you live alone, grumping about the day and what went wrong and how you stuffed it up and what you do differently and feeling regretful, instead turn it around. Do a cup half full rather than a cup half empty, and ask yourself, what went well today? And find 3 things that went well. 3 things that went well and why. And they just need to be a sentence each. That little exercise alone is guaranteed to put you in a different place than sitting down and bitching and grumping and being critical about your day and your own performance. The last one, number 3, is playing to your strengths. It's not about working continually on your weaknesses, as long as they're not glaring, because there was, and I teach in leadership at UniSA, and there was some management literature, certainly a decade or more ago, that said we had to work on our weaknesses no matter what. Well, we've changed, I guess, in our perspective on that, and instead it's about maximizing your strengths. And there are various texts out that allow you to do that. That's a really good one, the one by Marcus Buckingham and Donald Clifton on Now Discover Your Strengths. That's a great book, and Buckingham has written a number of books in that area. So some hints about what makes us happier as individuals that allows us to get through our day and helps us to be better leaders. Let me talk to you now briefly about something called the Lasada ratio. This, I think, has profound impact for your culture of your team, your department, your area. What on earth am I talking about? There was a study, and the study looked at 60 companies. 1/3 were flourishing economically, 1/3 were doing okay, and the other 20 were failing and struggling in terms of viability. The researchers went into the companies, they recorded and transcribed every word that was said in their business meetings. I mean, it doesn't sound like a particularly enjoyable task, but it was certainly thorough. And then each sentence was coded for being positive or negative. Were they positive or negative in their phrasing? And this provided a simple ratio of positive to negative statements. So what would you imagine would be the difference between the companies that were flourishing economically and those that were failing in relation to positive versus negative words, particularly in relation to a straightforward ratio? It's called the Lasada ratio, by the way, because it was Marcel Lasada who was instrumental in doing this research. So what were the results? What would you guess the results were? Flourishing companies, 2.9 to 1, so virtually 3 to 1 for positive versus negative statements. The research also showed that below that ratio, companies not doing well economically. But there's an overrider here. You don't want to go overboard with it. Life is like a ship with sails and a rudder, because above 13.1 and without any negative rudder, the positive sails flap aimlessly and you can lose your credibility. So we've all been exposed to those people who are just gushing all over the place and positive plus, and it is a bit off-putting, and after a while it's not particularly genuine and it's seen as not particularly authentic. But if you're serious about your team and your leadership, then ask yourself, what's my ratio in my team in terms of positive versus negative statements? How do we measure up? I know I'm talking about teams, but let me just take an aside for just a very brief moment here and say, look, this also applies to relationships, and I'm talking about marriages. So what do you think the ratio might be in a marriage? Because basically if your relationships at home are falling apart, then that doesn't help you in the work scene to be a particularly effective leader. Let me assure you that 2.9 to 1 means you're headed for divorce. So it might be all right in companies, but it's certainly not all right in the domestic scenario. And let me tell you that if it's 1.1 is to 3, it's an unmitigated disaster. So if you're giving one positive comment and 3 negative, fault-finding, bitchy comments, then yep, this marriage is probably not going to last very long. So let me cut to the chase. What does a strong and loving marriage look like? It's about 5 to 1. So for what it's worth, the research is pretty clear on that. And by the way, if any of you happen to be parents, then that goes for your children too. If you want your kids, and I've done a lot of work in my past life with kids and adolescents, but if you want kids with strong self-esteem, then you better get that ratio right. 5 positive comments to every 1 critical or negative comment. So moving on, what else do we know? We know that happiness is contagious. They did a study with a National Basketball Association where the teams would come back from defeat and some would collapse. So what was the difference here where teams would actually come back from any defeat and others would fall over? Bullet point 2 says all the sports page quotes from every member of the teams over the entire season were collected. Sounds like an arduous task to me, but somebody did it. And each quote then was blindly rated for optimism versus pessimism. For example, we lost because we suck, got a 7 for pessimism, because people are owning their mistakes in a really quite negative way and really beating up on themselves. Whereas the comment, we lost because of the referee's stupid call, got a 7 for optimism, because they're actually suggesting the problem is more out there rather than owning it and beating up on themselves. And then what happened is they formed a team profile and tried to predict how each team might do. So what will you suggest? Here we go, we're rating the whole team. Well, optimistic teams did better than expected after a defeat, and pessimistic teams did worse. So yes, not only is it important for leadership to get the mix right, but it really does help if you've got an optimistic team, because this is what influences culture, and culture influences productivity. The next study also just looked at quotes from the coaches alone, and the coaches' optimism predicted resilience just as well as the optimism of the whole team. And I think that team down there on the bottom right corner, and the emblem probably needs a little bit of optimism right now as they battle a few things that are going on. Of course, just minor hiccups in their football world. But moving right along, the conclusion, happiness is contagious, and it correlates back to the powerful role of the leader to be positive and to nurture well-being in the team or unit. Look, there's no doubt about it now that leaders set the culture for an organization, and the research I've done says there's up to 60% of the culture of the organization or team is related straight back to the leader. So it's really up to you as leaders or future leaders to make sure that you do understand the power that you have, and that happiness is in fact contagious, and yes, a large part of that comes from you. Moving on, what do we see? We see happiness is more contagious than loneliness or depression. So what are the implications for leadership and for morale amongst the groups? Well, basically on the negative side, a few sad or lonely or angry apples can spoil the morale of the team or unit, but, and it's a big but positive morale is even more important and can boost well-being and the performance of the entire team or unit. So the bottom conclusion is important here. The cultivation of happiness, which is really a neglected side of leadership, this is really crucial, absolutely crucial. Optimal performance is tied to well-being. The higher the positive morale, the better the performance. And as I said before, that general morale, 60% of it at least, is attributed back to leadership. So that's the P. Let me go on to E. These are relatively shorter in comparison, but E stands for engagement. It's like that, being in the moment, being in the flow, being in your element, being in the zone. They're the times when you're completely absorbed by the task, when time stops for you, when you lose self-consciousness. You say afterwards, gee, that was fun, that was wonderful, I really enjoyed that, gee, that was great, or I wish I could do it again. These are the activities that really allow you to be in the zone when you're in your element. Now, what is that for you? Because this is something that gives you energy. If you can also do this at work, then that's a massive bonus. But sometimes people have these zone activities outside of work, and sometimes it might be wood turning, it could be fishing, it could be playing sport. For me, it's writing. When I sold the practice off 7 years ago to come back to one-man band, I decided to write some books, and I've written half a dozen or so, and every time I'm writing, and I normally cross a day off a week to try to do that, I'm in the zone. Like, time is irrelevant to me, and I can almost skip lunch because I'm so much in the zone, just enjoying what I'm doing. For some, it might be designing websites, it might be painting, but you've got to ask yourself, what's being in the zone for me? Because that's where you get your energy from, and if you can do that at work, as I said, then that's a massive plus. So think about something you need to do at work that you don't like to do, and then ask yourself, how could I manage this task using my highest strength? Which is another way of coming at this whole issue of being in the zone, because typically you're in the zone when you are in fact using your strength, and whatever strength that might be. And that relates back to some of that work, as I indicated, from Marcus Buckingham a moment ago. The R is relationships. Other people are the best antidote to the downs of life and the single most reliable up, positive relationships. So, for example, doing a kindness exercise to somebody else produces the single most momentary increase in well-being of any exercise that has been tested. The kindness exercise. So what you do is one unexpected thing, and you do it tomorrow, and you just do it. And notice what happens to your mood, but also notice what happens to those around you. For example, I've been in a car park where I've said to the attendant, look, here's, I'm paying for my, my ticket as I'm coming out of the car park, and look, here's $5 towards the person next door. Well, it's amazing what happens when you get down to the next lights. I mean, people start waving at you and saying hi, and it blows them away, and it just is a random kindness exercise, and people do all sorts of things like that. It really is a boost. It's a two-way street. It certainly boosts your own sense of well-being, but helps make others' worlds go round too. And how you celebrate, number 2, is more predictive of strong relations than anything else. I just want to drill down on this very issue right now about how you celebrate with others, because as I've said here, celebrating with others is predictive of strong relationships. So if you want to build a strong relationship, learn how to celebrate with others. So where on earth am I going with this? Well, let's say we've got 2 people, A and B, and someone says, I just received a promotion and a raise at work. I guess you could probably say that one person might be positive about that and one person might be negative about that, but think about how you might respond if someone said, I just received a promotion and a raise at work. Let's drill down on that a little further, because remember, how you celebrate with people is highly predictive of a strong relationship that you'll be able to cultivate with them. So let's break down that communication, I just received a promotion and raise at work, into 2 major constructs, active and passive versus constructive and destructive. So if I said I just received a promotion and a raise at work, and you said, oh, that's good news, you deserve it, where the non-verbals were kind of minimal or little, or there's no active emotional expression, then we'd probably say that was constructive, but it was probably pretty passive. There's not much non-verbal happening here. Let's take another example. If you came back with, well, that sounds like a lot of responsibility to take on, does that mean you're going to spend less time at home now? and your non-verbals was a display of negative emotions, and you had a furrowed brow and you were frowning a bit, well, that's probably going to be classed as destructive, but listen, it's active. Down in the bottom corner, we have the comment that says, "What's for dinner?" where you've virtually disregarded what the individual has said, and there's little or no eye contact, and you're turning away, leaving the room, which is not a good way to build relationships. So clearly, the active, constructive, which is the top left-hand corner, is the way that we ought to be responding. So what does that sound like? It sounds like, "That's great. I'm so proud of you. I know how important this is to you. Please relive it with me. Where were you when the boss told you? What did he say? How did you react?" You know, we should just go out and celebrate this. There's eye contact, there are displays of positive emotions, smiling, laughing, touching, etc. Now, that's really important to understand the difference here, because when someone wants to celebrate, you need to know how to do that. And it is, in fact, this top area that really is key, being able to celebrate with them. Now, how do you do that exactly? How do you celebrate with a person with active and constructive responding? Well, basically, you listen carefully to them when the person tells you about something good that happened to them. Now, unfortunately, most people, when that happens, they go, "Oh, yeah, well, I got a raise too last week," or "I got a promotion," or "Gee whiz, yeah," and they go talking about themselves, and you go, golly. I mean, when are people going to just learn to shut up and listen? And then you go out of your way to respond actively and constructively. And how do you do that? You ask the person to relive the event with you. The more time he or she spends reliving, the better. And they spend lots of time responding. So this really does increase the attachment and increase the relationship. The evidence is quite clear on that. Look, don't forget praise too. Praise is a big one. One of the first articles I wrote, I remember back in the 80s, was praise increases love and friendship, and we don't do that much in the workplace. Most people will say, "Oh, gee whiz, mate, when you hear of something around here from the boss, it's normally a kick up the whatever." Well, look, praise really does show that the leader was really watching. It shows that the leader took time to see exactly what the person did. And when the praise is specific, not just, "Hey, you did a good job," but the praise is more authentic and genuine, then that really does assist people tremendously. Remember what I said about the 3:1 or 2.9:1 Lasato ratio? Well, praise is a big feature in that, and we don't do it enough, not only at work, but at home as well. Let me move along into meaning. Meaning is belonging to and serving something that's bigger than yourself. So what activities or pursuits allow you to experience meaning? Well, you give of your time, you give of your talents, you give of your resources, you give of your money in any number of ways. And that shows quite clearly that when you give out, you receive dramatically in return. But it's serving something bigger than yourself. For those who are spiritually aligned, then certainly it might be belonging to your local church. For those who want to make a difference in the community, it might be a volunteer organization. But you work out how you want to commit to something bigger than yourself, and that is a definite way to assist your general well-being. And finally, the A, accomplishment. It's the achieving life, it's pursuing success, it's winning, and it's mastery. It's really about accomplishment. You know, I got that degree, I got that diploma, I worked darn hard for it, and I achieved it. And it's about self-discipline, it's about grit. And often we know that people who are good at their areas, whether it's music, chess, athletics, they all did the same thing. They showed interest in their talents, but they all practiced between 2 to 4 hours a day for 10 years. Believe it or not, it requires that self-discipline, it requires true grit. And the 10-year mark was often an amazingly similar finding. No matter whether you're talking about musical talent or mathematical talent or athletic talent, that it takes about 10 years to reach the 10,000 hours and you can see the levels of performance from individuals who have put in the extra hard yards, no matter whether it's 10,000 hours or whatever it might be. But it's true grit. And basically, the question is, well, if it's true grit, how does IQ compare with self-discipline and predicting grades in secondary school? Because when I was growing up, we were always told it was about IQ. I was always told that it was the stuff between the ears that counted. But self-discipline is actually twice as important as IQ in predicting success in school, and of course in the workplace. The piece of paper gets you in the door in the workplace. It gets you the interview, but it doesn't get you up the ladder. Something called self-discipline does, as well as these other PERMA factors. So, true grit, no matter how you call it, it's an extreme trait of self-discipline. Some have got true grit, others have just grit. But no matter what, you need a very high persistence and a high passion for the objective. So, how would you rate yourself on each of those elements? Where would you like to be? And where would you see yourself now? And I guess that's something that each of us will look at and make some scores to indicate where we're going in terms of our life and the PERMA principle that I've just outlined to you. Final word. George Burns said, happiness is having a large, loving, caring, close-knit family in another city. That sounds like something George Burns would say. But on a more serious note, in terms of happiness and well-being, Mother Teresa said, let no one ever come to you without leaving better and happier. Be the living expression of God's kindness, kindness in your face, kindness in your eyes, and kindness in your smile. Thank you. It's been a pleasure sharing with you tonight on positive psychology and how it relates to leadership, and I hope you picked up some clues from that about how to make your life perhaps somewhat more effective, but certainly those around you. If there are any questions at all, feel free to ask those questions on the question area, or if you've got particular questions, then perhaps Emily in Melbourne can release the microphone for you if you did have any questions, and you could ask the question audibly. So if there are any questions, feel free to ask them now.
Okay, sorry, Russell back here again. Hi everybody, do you have any questions for Darryl? Looks like we've all gone mute.
Well, I know there's a lot there to think about, and a lot to take in, and it might need some stimulation. And for many individuals, this is new territory. This is new information. I know positive psychology hasn't been around forever, so I know that many people in the workplace are still assimilating it. So I hope your assimilation goes on well beyond this place. All the very best with it.
Thank you very much, Darryl. I sort of